would quit it. You know, the disciples were a poor lot of men. I mean, they traveled around with Jesus, no place to stay. Whoever lets us spend the night, we'll spend the night. What y'all have to eat, we'll eat. Meager resources. They had a treasurer, his name's Judas. Because you know what? Making disciples, whether you're rich or you're poor, making disciples and taking the gospel to the world requires resources. The problem, though, is sometimes we take the resources that God has entrusted to us to be about mission for Him, and we begin to consume those resources on ourselves, trying to make heaven here and now. Some of you are familiar with the story. You're familiar with the story of the Exodus of the children of Israel. You know the story where the Hebrews are slaves to the Egyptians. God raises up Moses. Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, God said, let my people go. And if you read that story, I reread it a couple of times this week, and it's pretty fascinating because here's what's happening. Pharaoh says to Moses, you have lost your mind. I'm not going to let my whole slave force go. And Moses says, oh, really? And God sends a plague. And so you got these bad plagues, and after a while the plagues get so bad that Pharaoh says, Moses, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I have sinned, I've insulted your God. If you'll just make all this stop, I'll let them go. And so it all stops. And Pharaoh says, change my mind again. I'm going to keep them. And it goes back and forth, back and forth. Well, one time, there's this plague, and Pharaoh's had it. I think it's hailing, and lightning, and thunder, and all this hail. And Pharaoh can't stand anymore, and so it stops. And he says, all right, I'm going to let you go, Moses. Now, who is it that wants to go? Who are you going to take? And Moses said, we're going to take men and women, and we're going to take our little ones. We're going to take our children and our teenagers and our cows and our herds. And Pharaoh hardens his heart again. No. I'll let the adults go, but that's it. Not going to let the kids, not going to let teenagers, not going to let you take any animals or livestock. Pharaoh said, we can't do that. We're not going. So he hardens his heart, more plagues. Then, after a while, Pharaoh says, okay, I'll let everybody go, kids and all. But you got to keep your stuff here. You can't take your stuff with you. Moses said, we got to take our stuff. We got to take our cows. We got to take our herds. Now, in that day, your cows and your herds, that was your wealth. And so Moses says to Pharaoh, we're not going unless we go with our wealth. And you know why they wanted to take their wealth? Because for the Hebrew, the way you worshipped was with your wealth. We got to take our cows because we worship God by offering them as sacrifices. We got to take our sheep because that's the way we worship. We got to take all the blessings, and slaves didn't have a lot of blessings, but we've got to take all the blessings that God has entrusted to us out into the wilderness, not so that we'll have something to live on. You think, that's what I thought originally, they got to eat. Guess how they ate? Guess how they ate? Manna came from heaven. They're on a journey. God says, you'll have more to eat when you get to the promised land. Right now, I'll feed you from heaven. Take your wealth and worship me with it. Hey, it didn't take my imagination much to say, you know who the new Moses is? It's Jesus. And Jesus got these people and said, guess where I'm going to take y'all? I'm going to take you to the promised land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. And yet you've got to be on mission until you get there, and I will feed you, but I'm going to make you wealthy so you can take your wealth and worship me. You know why? Most of the 7,000 people group that are unreached are still unreached because it's just hard to get there. It's expensive to get there. It's expensive. And I'm proud, I'll tell you what, in a good kind of way, in a spiritual kind of way, I'm proud of our church because there's people here in our church, part of this church body, and they're getting this picture. I'm a wealthy person, and I'm wealthy to worship with my wealth. And I'm giving, and you know, we've been able to take the gospel to 14 new villages, and we've got people living in those villages. And we've got a group that's going in October, and some of you need to pick up an application to be part of that team that goes in October. We've got a team that's going to go in January, and some of you need to get ready to go to January. Some of you need to go for 2 months. Some of you need to go for 2 years. Some of you just need to upplant your life, and you need to go. And some of the rest of us need to use our wealth to get you there and keep you there because our wealth has been given to us for worship. little guy in my office the other day, and he looked at me, he says, man, I've learned a new way to pray. And I said, okay, a new way to pray. I'm always interested in a new way to pray. I've learned to pray like this. I thought, what in the world? Never seen that before. Is that the cross? Is that what that means? And I just kind of looked at him and he said, I've learned to pray like this instead of like this. And he said, most of my life I have prayed just trying to hold on to everything and keep everything and ask more to hold on to. And he said, now I'm learning to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Realizing that what I have I should hold loosely because it really doesn't belong to me. It's been entrusted to me. It's part of the resources of the Almighty God given to me so that I can take really His wealth and use it in His mission. What happens when this whole church gets that? I have seen in less than a year, I have seen what practically can be done when just a handful of people get it and realize that we are now taking the gospel to places that it absolutely has never, ever been. I'm seeing what happens when just a handful of people in a single church gets that. Tell me what happens when we all get that. It's unbelievable. So you say, well, are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure, because heaven's coming. Heaven's coming. I got a good friend who just built this incredible, spectacular home. It's a good home, and while they were building this home, they were living in a travel trailer while they built, you know. I think that's a pretty good way to do things. But I think it would have been dumb if while they were in the travel trailer building the big home that they said, let's invest $100,000 in the travel trailer. Sometimes I think it's dumb when we just want to keep taking all our resources and just right here. When we don't have to build anything, it's being built for us. Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you. And I'm just telling you, it's a challenge what happens when we all get this. So having a good grip of heaven protects us from becoming overly discouraged, overly attached. And here's my final thought. We'll go. It also protects us from becoming, and you're going to have to think with me here. Because some of you are going to think I've lost my mind. If you really believe in heaven, if you're on mission for Christ, it keep you from becoming overly protective. It's overly protective of what? Your life. Our very life. Number one question, when we began to address an unreached people group and talk about going to West Africa, the number one question I was asked from people, curious people, is this: how dangerous is it? Number one question. How dangerous is it? Now, I'm not being a smart aleck, even though I can do that sometimes, I know. But I'm really not being smart. But listen, does it matter how dangerous it is? Should it matter? Should it really matter? I mean, Jesus is saying, he says, guys, I'm going to send you out in a little bit, and you're going to be like a bunch of doves and lambs among wolves. It is dangerous. And I want to tell you again, many of these people that are still unreached are unreached because it's hard to get to, it's expensive to get to, and it's dangerous once you get there. Many of them are hostile, and we think, well, why go if they're hostile to the message that we have to proclaim? Because our King has said, I want you to go. And our King has said that I'm going to have people made up in my kingdom from every people group. And I'm using the power of the gospel. And I'm sending my disciples to go there and to risk all, because they don't mind risking all, because they understand even if we die, we win. You know what Paul said? For me to live is Christ, and to die is what? Tell me. It's gain. I win. I win here. I read this week a story on Baptist Press, and I want to read part of this story to you. The story really begins in about 1970, takes place in Romania, when a guy by the name of Joseph Zahn was a Baptist pastor in Romania. The problem in the early 70s, being a Baptist pastor in Romania, Romania was under communist rule. And so the Communist Party did everything they could possibly do to shut Joseph Zahn up, because he's preaching, having some success, and the Communist Party wants to shut him down. Let's see. He was arrested and imprisoned several times in Romania during the 1970s. He was charged with being a Christian minister. And each time he underwent several weeks of intense interrogation, beatings, and mind games before finally being exiled from the country in 1981. Finally, in 81, they just kicked him out of the country. It was in this climate that he began to understand what he called the theology of martyrdom, which later became the subject of his book entitled Suffering, Martyrdom, and the Rewards in Heaven. Did you get that? Suffering, martyrdom, and the rewards in heaven. Because if you don't think heaven's real, you're not going to put up with hardly anything. Because it's about here. It's about now. It's about being protective. It's about holding on to what you got. It's about being afraid to lose. But if you think heaven is a reality, and if it has the grip of your heart, then it makes no difference what you lose now, because you really don't lose. He says, from a practical standpoint, Zahn said his imprisonment helped him form a clear view of the biblical response to persecution. When the secret police officer threatened to kill me, to shoot me, I smiled and I said, "Sir, you don't understand that when you kill me, all you do is you send me to glory. And you cannot threaten me with glory. The more suffering, the more trouble, the greater the glory. So why say stop this trouble? Because the more suffering, the greater the glory is going to be up there." During one particularly harrowing session of interrogation, Zahn told his inquisitors that spilling his blood would only serve to water the growth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Part of the theology of suffering, he learned, was that tribulation, listen to this, tribulation, suffering, is never an accident, but it is part of God's sovereign plan for building his kingdom. Watch this, guys. You need to hear it. If Nothside Baptist Church is going to be on mission, the one that God has given us to do, it will require suffering, because he's written it in the plan. You say, really? Look at Jesus. Look at the rest of the disciples. Do you know where the greatest explosion in the kingdom of God is taking place today? It's in China. And the Chinese Christians, the underground church, I mean, an explosion of Christianity taking place there. Ask a Christian there, where did all this come from? They're going to say, way back there when American Christian missionaries shed their blood, way back there, they provided what we're seeing and experiencing.